Welcome to Your Health Reset, where we address the real root causes behind health issues today to get you rapid results on your health journey so you can be who you came here to be, mind, body, and spirit. I'm your host, Sinclair Kennally, survivor of complex chronic illness, expert on resolving root causes, and co-founder of Detox Rejuvenation and Meditation RX. Let's get started.
Welcome back. We are continuing our conversations on root causes and the rapid results we can get when we finally address those root causes. I'm your host, Sinclair Kennally, and today I am joined by the wonderful Kelly Brogan, and she is here to help me unpack all things mental illness and why we're not having a more sophisticated, honest conversation about the mental issues that we're facing today. Welcome, Kelly.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You've had quite a journey. I would love to just give you a chance to share why you're so passionate about this topic and how you've arrived at the thought process that you have today.
So it's funny because I have been in deep exploration around why it is that I have had the arc that I have had over the past, I would say, like 10 or so years. And if I'm really honest, which I'll choose to be, I think I carried a deep belief from early in my childhood, which I think is a very common one, especially for women, that is collectively and societally programmed, and then certainly our family of origins pile on to, which is that I'm actually crazy and I hope nobody will notice. And when I say I'm crazy, it's the decoupling that happens in childhood around our vital force energy and all of that animation that can be shamed out of us as simply as don't jump on the couch, stop crying, calm down, be a good girl. And so we have this fracture that starts to build that gets crystallized over the years of our development that basically says who you are, what you believe, what you feel, you better hide it, right? If you want to stay connected, continue to experience approval and really survive in this realm. I became a psychiatrist, perhaps to compensate for that or to combat that or to make sure I was on the right side of the crazy. And I guess consciously I became a psychiatrist because I worked a suicide hotline at MIT where I went to college and it was a very prevalent issue at the time and probably still is. And I came under the illusion actually that we have cracked the code of mental illness and all that needs to happen to help people is that we need to get them into the care of psychiatrists and on their medications and then everything will be better. And why that was so appealing to me at the time was probably because emotionally I had that little tolerance for human suffering that I needed a quick fix, not for the people I was helping, but actually for me and my nervous system, right? Because if you've ever been around somebody who's really sick, really having a hard time, really struggling, or maybe in acute crisis, you know that what happens is empathically, your heart starts racing, you become uncomfortable, and you probably need literally on a physiologic level to make it stop. So how do you make it stop? You find the solution. You manage the situation. Making it stop does not involve just being with, right, what it is for a human to struggle and suffer in the witnessing eye of another human. So we don't have experience feeling feelings. We don't know how to feel feelings. And so it's so easy to take the bait of the magic pill. And that's exactly what I did. I specialized in not only psychiatry and psychopharmacology, but specifically what's called reproductive psychiatry. So I specialized in medicating pregnant and breastfeeding women because I believed that much in this modality and this approach to human behavior, cognition, and mood. And it wasn't until I had my own brush with the medical system when I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition was part of my first pregnancy that I wanted out. And I started to explore what other options I had that didn't involve taking a prescription for the rest of my life. And the rest is history. I put my illness into remission. And that inspired, interestingly, a lot of rage in me. It wasn't like unicorns and fairy dust and, oh my God, it's so wonderful, I'm cured. It was like, wait a minute. What did I just invest blood, sweat, and tears and $200,000 of debt into? Was it a pile of lies? Is some of it true? And so unpacking that and working in my practice with what ultimately became my specialty, which is helping women to come off these medications, was actually the beginning of a pretty deep spiritual journey for me through many a dark night of the soul and really coming into contact with a lot of the trauma-based programming that I was really working under the weight of. And that's really where I focus these days.
Wow, that's a beautiful encapsulation of a very intense journey. I know.
Intense, my favorite word.
Mine too. Yeah. And as somebody who called in on those hotlines many times, I appreciate you doing that. And it's an amazing service, actually. Although the elevator music has to go because it's the weirdest. It is the strangest experience to be on hold waiting for a volunteer to talk to you, listening to elevator music. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit further because I'm thinking about every interview that we do on the summit almost as like a love letter to somebody struggling with their health. And some of them are at the beginning of their health journey. Some of them are no more than their practitioners do. And they're just looking for that next gem that helps them keep going. And some of the people in the audience are practitioners that are tired of crashing their patients. Or why aren't these people getting better? And with this explosion of chronic illness that we have today. And I'm thinking back on my own journey and how I spent easily over $100,000 in therapy and got medicated up, down, every which way, when really I had mold, heavy metal poisoning, and I was very off my dharma. And I needed skill sets and I needed to give back on my life. So I'm wondering if you could speak to those three audiences, the newbies, the pros, and the people who have to be pros to be CEOs of their own health journey. As we unpack this a little bit today, like, what do you see when you look at the landscape of mental health today? What do we understand? What has recently come to light? And what are we still struggling to come to grips with?
So I have, just for the purposes of clear illustration, broken the journey down into what I think of as three parts, right? Get real, get well, get free. That's how I segmented my last book. And the get real part is speaking to exactly your question, which is like, what is the information? Right? How do we educate ourselves about that which we might not encounter through, let's say, mainstream media or allopathic medical training, even honestly, at this point, even any certified body really has in many ways been captured, unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe it's meant to be that way. I don't know. But it's the reality that there are a lot of influences that have, actually, the term is recuperation, when there is a capture from a seeming vested interest that ends up corrupting and influencing, let's say, midwifery or naturopathy. You could even look into the Waldorf school system, that the origins of so many of these alternative modalities, chiropractic, that have now come under the influence and maybe hegemony of the allopathic American consciousness when it comes to health, which is fundamentally predicated on randomness, bad luck, timing, and a material universe, right? What is what you get, what is measurable is what is real. Whereas the soul of chiropractic, for example, is vitalism, right? It's this idea that the body has an innate wisdom, that every single symptom is meaningful. And, that all that you're experiencing is an expression of you, from you, about you. Those are two world views. And it doesn't ever work to stretch yourself into one when you're in the other, right? You're going to just slingshot back. I was a perfect match for the allopathic system while I was involved in it because of the nature of my beliefs and really the substance of my available consciousness. You are always going to be exactly where you are meant to be. And so that's why I always reference this Maya Angelou quote, which is like, when you know better, you do better, right? Because when you're ready, there's no morality. This is not a meritocracy. When you're ready and you're going to do the thing. And guess what? The exact right resource is going to come to you. I have seen this thousands of times, right? And I've also seen people read my entire first book with hundreds of references around the truth of psychotropics, which is that we are not told the full story about their efficacy, about their safety, about what it takes to come off these meds, so their addictive potential, which is obviously included under the umbrella of their safety, and about what else you could possibly do to feel better, right? What is another way? We are never consented because prescribing physicians, I've been one myself, are not in a position to do. That's unfortunate because that's actually the Hippocratic oath that we take, right? The do no harm intention is very real for doctors, right? They are people who come to this specialty for valorous reasons, right? Because they want to help and support. And also maybe their shadow side is that they have such intolerance of human suffering that they need a fix and they need to participate in that fixing mentality. That's fine. Whatever it is, they're not in a position to know what is known. So if you were to read my books or Joanna Moncrief's books or David Healy's books or Irving Kirsch's books or the person who woke me up, Robert Whitaker's books, you will find, wow, there's a lot known. And none of it is published by industries. These are non-industry published, non-industry funded, published scientific papers. And then there's a lot known just on the street, right? There's chat rooms and bulletin boards and peer-to-peer support networks that have grown out of the millions who have walked away from psychiatry forever. And why have they done that? Because it has not served them in the way that it promised to. So what I have found with conventional medicine is that with these agents we wish would be magic pills, they end up propagating and perpetuating exactly that which they purport to resolve. And that's true for acid blockers. It's true for antibiotics. It's true for antidepressants, right? You take it because you want the thing to go away. And lo and behold, there's something called tardive dysphoria, which is long-term chronic depression that you can develop from the antidepressant exposure. What? I thought I was taking it to get rid of that thing. Now I have a new thing that wouldn't have existed. That's like pretty much the same, maybe worse as the thing I thought I was resolving. And again, that's true for all of these warfare-based medications, wherever you have an antihypertensive, and they call it rebound effect, right? When you get a skyrocketing blood pressure, when you stop your blood pressure medication, they call it a rebound effect, but it's really just a euphemism for the ways in which your body is having to adapt to this unnatural, literally, exposure in order to create a new normal for you, whereas the old normal is still wanting attention, right? It's still wanting resolution. And so the get real part, the exposure to the information is out there. Obviously, I have attempted to help with that in as many ways as I can. Let it get exposed to it and then be like, does this resonate? Does it feel like it ignites something for me? Because if it does, there's action that is wanting to be taken, right? If you're a practitioner and you're turned on by what you didn't learn in your training, you have to walk the walk. You don't have to do anything, but it's ideal if you walk the walk of exactly what you would usher your patients through, right? That authenticity is necessary right now. Nobody wants a guide, a healer, a guru, or even a doctor who hasn't lived the thing, right? If you're not energetically already inhabiting that which you're helping your clients, patients, or customers with, they're going to feel it and it's not going to be a match. So how do you walk the walk? I think of a chopping wood, carrying water thing, where first you get very real with your lifestyle, right? How are you eating? What are you eating? What time are you going to bed? What kind of water are you drinking? What kind of products are you consuming? Are you buying this detergent or that detergent? And I have programmed, that there are many ways to address getting very clear on the action steps of self-care. I believe self-care is the beginning, this is my bias, to any process of personal reclamation, any process of awakening, any process of attuning to your inner guidance and to the support that's waiting to come, buoy and deliver you to your more blissful, embodied, pleasure-filled life. And after you get that under your belt, so that I call the getting well part, then there's the getting free. What is getting free? Do we even really want to be free? What does that mean? And to me, I use the word sovereignty a lot because I have come to understand sovereignty as getting to a place where the controversy in your life is over, where you are no longer fighting, on the outside with systems that don't serve you in the way that you want them to, with people who cannot offer you the meeting of your needs in the way you wish that they could, your lover, your father, your girlfriend, whatever it is, right? And of course, how do you end the war inside? How do you begin to recognize that it always begins here and that we always have exactly what we want? And the reason we don't have the things we want is because it's either unsafe for us to have it as far as we've decided, or because we don't actually want it. And when you start to explore that split inside, what Carolyn Elliott calls the divided will, right? When you start to explore that, it's so painful and honestly a little shameful and confusing, and there's resistance. But then once you get in the practice of it, you just laugh at yourself and smile at your old patterns and the ways that we get in our own way, and we get in our way for good reason, right? And so you start to see the design of it all. And then you can get into this place where you're living a desire-based and driven life. And you recognize actually nothing has to change on the outside for me to be okay. No piece of legislation has to be passed. No difference in world hunger has to happen, right? And it's not like you get into a state of apathy. It's quite the opposite. Then, and from that place, your intuition comes online, and the next step, the exact next thing that you're meant to do becomes very clear to you. And it's not clouded by these old addictive, I refer to them as addictive patterns of trying to struggle with the insistence that something be on offer that isn't on offer. It's not available. I call it like trying to buy eggs from the hardware store. Like all of these places where we have pain in our lives are because we are insisting that something be available that is not available. It's not for sale, right? Like you don't go to the butcher to buy your vegan meal. And you do that when you think that you have a point to prove to the butcher and you think you know better how the butcher should be, right? You're going to school the butcher on how to be himself, for example. And you can do that all day long. It's great. I've done it for many years in my life, most of them actually. And there's a point you recognize that the power over model is actually the source of, I think, all human suffering, right? And that's where victim consciousness lives, which I've said, I think, is the only human pathology.
It's quite an encapsulation.
Careful when you give me the mic.
Yeah, I know. Right? Get real, get well, get free.
Yeah, it's just to paint what is nonlinear and it's very spiral into sort of like a linear conceptualization so that you can also say, for me, it's so important that like having compassion for ourselves when you are not ready to do something, to confront something, to change something, you're just not ready. And what I found is that when I get to the place where a certain kind of addiction, and that includes food addictions, smartphone addictions, relationship addictions, when a certain kind of addiction that is keeping at bay what I imagine will be a pain I can't bear,
See?
when it is ready to be let go, I have found that walking in the direction of that change, it feels like relief. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm doing the thing. This is so hard. And I'm proud of myself because it's really courageous. But can I do it? It doesn't feel like white knuckling. It feels like relief. And I could give you so many examples of that. And it doesn't mean it's not challenging. Relationships that I have left, for example, and that there's a massive exhale that happens along with the anguish of the loss or the confusion of the change, but it feels like relief. The people who have walked through my protocol, they did so not because it was the good thing to do or the right thing to do for their health, or it was time to get off their meds. They read a study about how bad they are. No, they did it. They leapt into the cold plunge, right? Because doing so actually felt like a relief relative to wherever they were stuck in stasis.
Yeah, I think back on my own journey and I think about the people that we help through our practice now and in our courses. And I see a real commonality with what you're saying. To me, I had to face my deepest fears about being unlovable, about being weak, about not belonging, about not receiving support from the outside. Talk about trying to go to a dry, whether it was the family or the allopathic medical system, whatever, and just accept the loss. And from that place of acceptance, my whole life got to burn down and start over again. And I don't think everybody has to be as dramatic as not everybody's a redhead.
I don't know what my excuse is.
You're both Irish, so
right. Say it's that. The lineage thing.
But I agree with that feeling of relief and helping people to sort for that, because I think that's one of the ways that we can reclaim our intuition when it's been held down for so long.
And yeah, there's like a grief, there is a self-consciousness. Like often even professionally, right? Like when you know you're on the verge of expanding your business or your offerings or even what you're doing vocationally, often you will say no to something that a part of you is, what is wrong with you? That is so stupid that you're saying no to that. Like I closed my private practice 2 years ago, had a 2-year wait list. I had a very successful Manhattan practice, charged what is commensurate with Manhattan prices for a specialist, all the things, right? To walk away from that, I had to confront a lot of inner critics that were trying to protect me, right? And they were saying things like, you're the only one who does what you do. Like, how dare you? What are you, stupid that you would relinquish that not only opportunity, but also responsibility? I had to look at voices that said, what are you going to do without that income? Who do you think you are? Like, your online business is not like that, or you can support your children and your animals and your lifestyle, whatever, without that. And I had to look at the fear of loss of like identity that was tied up in my being credentialed, pedigreed, licensed clinician, participating in those things. But the reason that I walked away from it was because it was no longer joyful for me. And the energetics of being in those spaces with the patients that I was working with seemed complete. Like, it just seemed like that is a part of me that is, it's ineffable. It's like I couldn't even justify it or explain it. If I tried, I would get to a place where it didn't make sense. So if you walk away from something when it's good enough, or maybe it's even more than good enough, and you can't imagine how you would live without it, that leap, it brings you into the chrysalis, right? Like, you start to melt. And if you can remember that there's like this confusion, right? Because it's not just grief, it's not just pain, it's not just fear, it's also relief, it's also excitement. It's also like the part of you that's, woo, where am I going? And all of that is swirling around, and it's confusing and it's disorienting. That is the signature of your expansion. And it always feels that way. Just be with it. Be with it and grow your nervous system capacity to be with that uncertainty, even just a few minutes at a time. When you want to like crawl back up into the uterus, can you sit with yourself, set a timer for 3 minutes and just be like, okay, I'm not going to do anything right this moment. I'm not going to send any emails. I'm not going to send any texts. I'm not going to do any searches. I'm just going to be with this sensation, because that's all an emotion really is. It's a sensation for 3 minutes and see what happens. What happens is it always moves. It always alchemizes. It always changes. And then you've offered yourself the presence that is healing, the presence we didn't get as kids, right? And that the presence to self translates into a safer world. You're already living in a safer world because you're not running from yourself. And so you don't have to project onto the rest of the world or your relationships, the parts of you that you were running from, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I think that you're speaking to a lot of what people are going through right now, is trying to reclaim that with whatever set of tools they're willing to experiment with. I know for a lot of people in the audience, they are working on, or they're either working towards getting off of drugs that were supposed to be temporary and now they are stuck on them, or they are actively trying to get off of them and do it in a safe way. And I know because of your expertise, I would love to use some of our remaining time just discussing the paradigm of pharmaceuticals for mental anguish and the lie that they work, and how do we actually get on that ride, and how do we get off of it?
Okay. We are a couple hundred years into this model of the human body. It's often referred to as like a Cartesian conceptualization of the mind is out here, the spirit is out there, and then here is the material body. And so psychiatry is like just hanging on by a thread in the realm of biology, right? So when I was trained in a very psychopharmacologically oriented, I was trained at NYU Bellevue and for my residency and fellowship and internship. And it was like, you go to Freudian analysis, like 5 days a week, you go to analysis, and then you also take your cocktail of multiple medications, right? Because I worked in Manhattan and it was very normative. And then, of course, it's now since become normative everywhere for people to be engaged in what's called polypharmacy, which means that like you could have a breakup in high school, get started on Zoloft, and I'm just thinking one patient, in your late teens. And then over time, iatrogenically, which means doctor-induced harm, you are then assigned new diagnoses and new prescriptions, right? So I based on a Yale study, 1 out of 23 people who are started on antidepressants then go on to garner a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So what we tell patients is it was unmasked. You always had that. And then there's some hand waving, like, it's genetic. It's like a built-in imbalance. So don't ask too many questions about what molecules or like what chemicals are imbalanced, because there's a bunch of different theories about excitatory neurotransmitters or whatever. The one that has gained mainstream penetrance is the serotonin theory. You can see it on billboards. You can watch a commercial about it. It's on your TikTok feed, right? So it's this idea that depression is caused by low serotonin or a serotonin imbalance. And this is just emblematic of every single psychiatric diagnosis, all of them. There are no exceptions. And the person who has done the work that is, I think, most powerful on this is basically a whistleblower investigative journalist, Robert Whitaker, I mentioned earlier. So you have this theory about what is wrong with you. And it feels good, I think, to some patients to go to their first appointment and feel validated, like they felt something off.
Yeah.
And then the doctor, credentialed authority, says to you, oh, you're right. You've been right this whole time. Something really is wrong with you. And there's nothing you can do about it except to take this med. And then, oh, here's a little something more that was wrong with you. And that's why you're having these side effects from your antidepressant. Now we're calling it bipolar. And now you can't sleep. So you need the sleep med. And then you're like inattentive during the day. So have it a little stimulant here and there. Right. So you become exposed to polypharmacy. You're on all these meds. And no one has ever really sat you down, and you've never really sat yourself down to assess what actually is going on with me. What is the why? Because allopathic medicine does not interest itself in the why. I'm not just talking spiritually, emotionally, trauma related, like literally, why is this occurring now? And you could stay in the biological realm, right? You look at something like postpartum depression, there are myriad of hormonal drivers, right? For example, I've come up with something I call the psychiatric pretenders, which are these reversible physiologic imbalances, including things like blood sugar instability, thyroid imbalance, including dairy intolerance, exposure to other medications like birth control pills that have been documented, antibiotics that have been documented to drive new diagnoses in the psychiatric realm. For example, micronutrient deficiencies, when you're basically eating a diet that's not compatible with your biology. And over time, you accumulate a micronutrient deficiency like B12, take some B12 and your symptoms go away, right? Are you going to take Zoloft for your B12 deficiency? Doesn't make any sense, right? You're going to take Zoloft for your thyroid imbalance? That doesn't make sense either. You're going to take Zoloft for your birth control adverse effects? That doesn't make sense. So we're just talking intelligent medicine here, and we're just in the physiologic realm. So all of the things we've been talking about this entire interview, where it comes to psychospiritual trauma and drivers, that's actually where I like to inhabit it. But let's just start with the low hanging fruit, right? Nobody asked why. So you're right for direct to consumer advertising that says you have a chemical imbalance. So you make the logical choice. You take a medication that you're told is going to help with your symptoms, sleep symptoms, mood symptoms, cognitive symptoms, with your energy imbalance, like you're super sluggish, or maybe you just have like persistent white noise all day long. Maybe you have panic attacks, you're brain fog, whatever it is. So you take this medication and you don't know that these medications, and this is based a lot on Irving Kirsch's work, actually don't work any better than placebo. And the way that they work better than placebo is actually because of something called the active placebo effect, which is because they have side effects, headache, dry mouth, constipation, sometimes diarrhea, and you start to feel the side effects. And because of the way you've been conditioned through media, you say, oh, the thing that's going to help me is it's coming on, right? And so it's starting to work. And your inner pharmacopoeia does the rest, right? What we call the placebo effect, and we're encouraged to dismiss as like a nuisance to scientific research, is actually the driver of most medical outcomes. And this has been illustrated in every domain, from surgery to conventional medicine and other specialties. And certainly in psychiatry, there's a good amount of research on this. And I could go into also the nocebo effect, which is when you think you're losing your antidepressant, right? So what happens often in taper settings or whatever is you feel vulnerable, and then you actually make happen the thing. And there's research that kept people, let's say, on their 40 milligrams of Prozac, but told them maybe they would be randomized to sugar pill and they become depressed, but they're still taking the thing. So it's like colloquially summarize the research. So it doesn't work in the way you've been told. Because if it did, then you'd look at the side effects totally differently. But let's get clear that there is a huge established body of research, much of which I try to summarize and collate, that they don't work. And then, so let's look at the effects. right? So if the reduplication of the placebo effect is counting for why we think these things work, and by the way, the hiding in the locked file drawer, which is totally legit option for these industry companies, of all of the inconvenient negative outcomes, right? Because when Irving Kirsch, for example, took through the Freedom of Information Act, all of the research out of the file drawers of these companies, what he found was that there's literally a coin toss. Different. Does it work? Does it not work? Same number of papers. In fact, a little more for the negative outcomes. But the FDA allows for these companies to you just keep tossing the coin until it comes up hit, and you can hide all the rest. This is not even corruption. And these companies have been convicted of multi-billion-dollar felonies. And we're not even talking about that. Sanctioned behavior. Okay. So just so you have the idea of like, why would I have the impression that they work if they don't? That doesn't make any sense. It does make sense, actually. And so then you look at the adverse effects, and you have all the stuff that you read in the insert, about like you could start bleeding, you could develop skin disorders, you could have this emergency or that emergency. The ones that I really started to focus on that I wish I had known early in my prescribing career are that these medications, psychiatric medications, but specifically antidepressants, can drive impulsive violence and specifically homicide and suicide in anyone. And I started to interact with like regular old people who were started on medications for run-of-the-mill things like a little work stress, divorce, whatever. And they end up literally like strangling their children. I have a blog on my site about this. Or they end up hanging in their garage and they've never felt suicidal a day in their life. And there are a lot of grassroots whistleblowers who have tried to make this clear. David Healy's done a lot of work on the propensities medications have to drive suicide, suicidality, people who never otherwise felt suicidal. And again, my training, I was told, your people are just getting energized enough to act on something that was pre-existing. And that's why you may not know about this, right? Because there's all sorts of caveats that are built into the prescriber's rhetoric. Okay. So that and how difficult it is to come off these meds. I was shocked when I started to dedicate my practice to helping people come off these meds. I thought, what's the big deal? You just stop them, or maybe you stop them over a month and whatever. And I was like literally running an outpatient rehab, probably 3 months into dedicating my practice to psych med tapers. That's when there's an order of operations here. First, we're going to send your nervous system a signal of safety. That's what I came up with my protocol, which is lifestyle based, right? Change diet, start to meditate, very basically contemplative practice, send your nervous system a signal of safety in all of these different ways, detoxing, right? Your exposures. Then you taper. And that process is still really slow because I have found that these meds are, in my experience, the most habit-forming chemicals on the planet. And that's for physiologic reasons. And then it's also for like spiritual reasons, right? Because if you've been told something is wrong with you, your feelings and your behavior is an example of that. And you've been fighting and warring with yourself with the supporting collusion of your family, friends, loved ones, and the medical system. There's a lot. It's like you're coming out of a cult, right? You're like waking up from anesthesia and you're like, how do I be me? I don't even know how. And everything hurts. Everything is scary about me, right? So there's like this whole other process that starts to get uncorked when you come off these meds. And it's like the heroine's journey. You wouldn't be called to it if you weren't destined for it. I found that over and over again. And you know what I call the canaries in the coal mine, which are the people who've been told that they're broken and sick, and they're like stigmatized, often like outcasts in many ways in society, especially if you get some of the unsexy diagnoses like schizoaffective disorder, for example. These people have gifts, literal gifts. And in other shamanic traditional societies, like in Africa, for example, there is, and this is documented and explored in the literature, there is a holding of these kinds of clairsentient, for example, people who are guided into their own power, who learn to work with their energies. Sometimes these folks are called empaths. I certainly believe everybody has these kinds of intuitive gifts. It's just that like when you came in, when you incarnated with them more awakened than others, or you're coming in with some past life assets, you often need what we used to have, which is the fabric of a collective, a community, a tribe, to help initiate you to your power. We do not have that at all in any way. Even childbirth has been taken away from us as a form of inbuilt initiation to our power, contact with that liminal space of existential fear. And we don't have that. So these folks, I've witnessed over and over again, when they go through this initiatory process of coming off these meds, they come into contact with their gifts, whether that's musical, artistic, whether it's writing, or simply being like a contributor to creative spaces. And that requires a certain kind of holding and support. And you really want to make sure you have that openness to attracting it. You don't have to build it. It's just going to come to you. And I really believe that the people who come off these meds, there is a courage that wouldn't be available if you weren't destined to do. And I've been so inspired. And it is archetypal. What I've gone through in my own spiritual journey has looked a lot. The pieces are the same, right? When you go off into the wilderness this way. However, I feel that there is a special kind of calling and that nobody should ever consider coming off meds if that calling isn't stirring.
It's really well said. We help people with coming out of chronic illness, especially when they have been doing the rounds and they've gone to practitioner after practitioner. And what we find is that as we restore their mitochondrial function, as we offload the toxins that disrupted their health processes in the first place, there is a reckoning to be had with all the stored emotion and the pain that they simply could not face before. But it's not about withstanding it, so to speak. And it's nothing to be afraid of. It's actually happens at the pace that people can handle every single time without exception. And there's a magic to the unfolding of it that almost takes my breath away.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
And they're the last ones to see it because we're stuck with ourselves. Yeah, nothing's different except for these 11 things. And also I looked up painting again and I called my sister that I'm estranged from. Everything's the same.
Exactly. Well, because we also have such a habit of struggle. What I found even in my own process is that I recently did a week-long water only fast, right? And I'd never done something like that where I paused my entire life. I did no tech. I did not talk to my friends. And I was just on my own in my house with my animals doing this thing. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Why? Because I got to see all of the ways that I have been addicted to literal stimulation, stress, and the habit of my problems, right? So the ways that I run from that are through communicating with my friends, honestly, because when I get into my victim stories about what's going wrong with my life with them, I don't have to feel whatever it is that might be underneath, right? That story if I framed it differently. I listen to podcasts, I read books, I eat food. There are so many ways that we get into these habits of running from ourselves that to grow the capacity, I've known about water fasting for a while. I had to literally grow my nervous system's capacity to be with myself for 7 days. I was not ready to do that 1 year prior. The way that, you heal your nervous system, as it starts with the basics of literally disburdening your system from all of the toxicant cargo it's been carrying. And then you just ease your way in and you're going to be guided to exactly what is the next best thing for you to do. Like you said, whether it's that tough conversation or whether it's exploring essential oils or homeopathy or plant medicine or whatever it is, a healer, chiropractic, whatever it is, you're going to be guided. That is the restoration of the connection to yourself and your intuition that we are never even told exists when we're kids. That concept is anathema. It's not even a part. It certainly wasn't in my upbringing. I was told that I don't know better. My parents know better what I need to do, right? I have 2 daughters. The ethos in my household is that everybody only ever does exactly what they want to do. And if there's a conflict, we come to an agreement that is mutually beneficial for both of us. And somehow that has always worked, right? So if I plan a trip, which I did recently, so I just have this example in my mind, to visit my girlfriend, right? 3 hours away in Florida. I want to bring my kids are tweens at this point. And my daughter before the trip was like, I don't want to go. We didn't go. canceled the trip, right? And my old model of parenting is, we're going, I planned the thing and everything. What do you mean, con? And it wasn't like a trivial reason. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it's trivial or not, because it's not up to me to determine whether her feelings are valid based on her evidence and how it is we got into the situation. So just, for example, there is a way you can reconnect to your desire and your impulses when you start to trust your yes and your no. Then you live in a safe world again because you've got you. You don't need anyone else to agree, affirm, approve. And that does not mean it's difficult. It just means that fundamentally it's all good. That restoration takes time, practice. And yeah, like you're saying, you don't often see it happening because it feels so much better to be in your victim energy of everything sucks. I hate life. It's not going my way, of fighting with reality. But eventually you get to the place where you're like, oh, I can appreciate literally like the feeling of the breeze right now, like on my skin. Like I can appreciate like looking at these like beautiful trees, like outside of my window. I can appreciate that like my body feels pretty comfortable in this moment or whatever. You start to like connect moments of appreciation because your nervous system can now handle appreciation. For me, that took years. And not everybody is carrying the burdens. Maybe, I don't know it. It's as messed up as I was, but there it is. But for me, it took literally years for that to feel good because like calm and peace felt like first boring and then like dangerous, but totally unwanted actually, relative to the hits that I would get from problems or focusing vigilantly on what was wrong. It's like a high and a low. And it's just never ending. The dance of the lighthouse, like looking for all the things wrong. Like
Right.
it's like a recovery process of literally unconditioning yourself around that. I mean, oh, we're so similar. Like we have such different journeys. So like the stuff we struggle with is so universal that we can just start to have compassion for ourselves and each other. We're figuring out this whole human thing.
I think we're all still figuring out this whole human thing. And
Yeah.
more so than ever, it's a really important time for us to have this conversation. I would love to end on something, inviting you to expand on something you said a couple moments ago, where you were talking about how people should wait to try to problem solve coming off of their meds until they feel that calling to do so internally. Could you expand on what you mean by that so people can help self-sort for that?
Yeah. Earlier in my career, in my first book as an exploding pill on the cover, I felt once you know this information, you would never take a medication and you would sort your life out so you're ready to come off. That is not how it works, as far as I'm concerned. So what I have found instead is that it's actually really beautiful to attune your emotional body to possibility. Right. I have a whole wall of testimonial videos. I've published in the medical literature, if that's your chosen form of exposure, but I love videos, right? So if you watch a video of somebody who has resolved, for example, I'll think of Graves' disease without surgery or radiation. If you watch a video of somebody who had a diagnosis of suicidal depression and psychosis, who is now med-free and thriving. If you watch a video of somebody who could not get over the death of their loved one without pharmaceutical help, and now they've come off their meds and they've found deep meaning in that loss, something inside of you will reorganize around your own unlived potential. That is when the calling comes forth, and it's irrepressible. It's, I am going here and I'm going to do it in the best way for me and on the timing that works for me, but I'm going here, right? And that is very different than reading my book, let's say, or whatever, reading a blog and saying, feeling a little shame, a little fear, and saying, oh, I did the wrong C. I got on this med and I shouldn't have. And now what? I got to get it off it quick. So I'm still in the good girl category because that's what drives us, right? I got to do the right thing. Because I have direct clinical experience with how sometimes that can be very challenging way to pursue this kind of a path, I don't think there's no mistakes, whatever, but it's not the most easeful process. Let's put it that way. So the calling, it feels like relief. right? It doesn't feel like something you put on your to-do list because now it's time to handle. That's a will-based engagement of your process. I'm going to do this. It's the same as I'm going to confront my childhood abuse because that's what spiritual people do. No, there's a way that you can allow for the unfoldment of your process that is inspired. And I think it doesn't happen through the information, although I am obviously a big advocate of informed consent and information. I think it happens through exposing yourself to stories of actual humans who are living and being in a way that you've been told was not possible. Right? And so when you see it's possible, what does it do for you? What does it enliven for you? So I dance and I've gotten really into pole dancing recently, right, in my life. And I watch videos all the time, every day, pretty much, of women who are a level of mastery, strength, flexibility, grace that I really don't think is possible for me in this lifetime. And what ignites within me when I watch them is whatever is possible for me. Because now I know that a woman can look like that, moving her body, right? Like it's just a mundane example. So I do think that's like a way to help discern.
It is a phenomenal way to end. Thank you for helping us to unpack how we have arrived at this important cultural moment in time and level of understanding as we navigate our own soul's path and what we're willing to do to support ourselves along the way. Thanks for sharing your wisdom today.
Thank you. Thank you for being in conversation with me.
Thanks for listening. Go to detoxrejuvenation.com to find the links in the show notes to everything we covered in this episode. Please subscribe, review, and share with other humans who need this precious information. Let's help each other. Until next time, love, Sinclair.